Okay, everybody, we're going to get underway. Please find your seats, and I'll begin introducing our next speaker. My name is Melissa Atchison. I am the Research and Extension Coordinator for Manitoba Beef Producers. We're very happy to be a partner in this great event and happy to be part of the organizing committee. One quick thing before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to remind everybody that the Manitoba Farm Women's Conference will be held in Winnipeg November 18th to 20th at the Vic Inn, and the deadline to register is tomorrow. So please, I implore you to check that out, go to the website, see what it's all about, some great speakers and a great event. So the deadline is tomorrow. Secondly, Paul Trimble, you are the winner of the FCC Door Prize, so thank you very much to FCC for that prize. And Paul, you can pick it up at, I believe, at the registration desk or at the FCC booth. I can't remember. There's 2 spots to go to, so just figure it out. You're going to be okay. Okay. Our next speaker and our keynote that's closing us out today is Dr. John Basarab. John is an associate professor of livestock genetics genomics in the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Alberta. He is also the CEO for Livestock GenTech and past associate editor for the Canadian Journal of Animal Science. John has over 30 years of experience working in the field of beef cattle management and production, and his current research areas include improving feed efficiency, DNA pooling as a low-cost genotyping strategy, development and evaluation of indexes for replacement heifer selection, more profitable feeder cattle for beef on beef and beef on dairy production systems, and management strategies to improve the resilience of beef cattle to climate change. John's work has led to numerous global collaborations, the development of one of the largest genotype-phenotype databases for genetic marker discovery in beef cattle in Canada, and the validation of genomic tools like InvigorHX. John has contributed more than 300 scientific and extension articles and is the winner of the 2010 Canadian Animal Industries Award in Extension and Public Service and co-recipient of the 2023 Aztec Award for Best in Agriculture. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Basarab.
Thank you. I'm going to stay down here, and the reason is I wander a lot. You'll notice that, and I didn't want to wander off the stage, right? So this is for my safety. Great, it's really great. This is great. It's great to be here. And so the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure I leave enough time at the end for questions. Maybe 15 minutes. So if I start carrying on too much, please start waving at me and leave time for questions. So what I want to do is I want to talk about all of the great genomic tools that we've discovered. And what this is for is our clientele is the commercial crossbred beef cattle producer. So we're essentially, everything we do starts off as, this is going to be for the commercial cow-calf producer. This is not going to be for any particular breed. So that kind of differentiates us a little bit. We've got a team, right? All these things can't be done without a team. I know many of you won't recognize many of these people here, but I just want to acknowledge them. They come from the University of Alberta. They come from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We've worked with Kim Ominski here, tremendous collaborator, Kim, and her graduate students. So within this database that you're going to see, there are Manitoba cattle, by the way, whether you know it or not. Okay, we work on some areas, right? And they come about because we've identified some opportunities. Years and years and years ago, we did a cow-calf audit with thousands of producers in Alberta. And essentially, we found out that the calf crop percentage, in other words, that's the number of calves you wean per 100 cows exposed to breeding or 100 females exposed to breeding. We found way back, 1991, the calf crop percentage was around 84%. And then we did it again 10 years later, and it's about the same. And a lot of other studies have come along, including the Canadian cow-calf audit and another one out of Western Canada, and including the SPA program out of the US. And almost all 84%. And so this is a tremendous opportunity. If I put a line there and say, more than likely we should be weaning 92 calves per 100 females exposed to breeding and call that an opportunity. So we're working on that, and you'll see when we develop genomic tools, they're aimed at trying to improve the calf crop percentage. The other thing that's going on, and I had a great chat with, where is he? a producer here. And I was talking to him about his herd, and he was saying, I split my herd up into red and black, right? Because that's common. So one of the things that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years, there has been a steady decline in the amount of heterosis. That's hybrid vigor, and you know how important hybrid vigor is to the cow-calf herd, commercial cow-calf herd, really important. Essentially, heterosis is responsible for increased fertility, lifetime productivity by 20-30% from the old crossbreeding work that was carried out many years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And really what's happened is, we're using common breeds, but also many of those breeds have been upgraded. We have red and black Simmental. We've got red and black Gelbvieh. We've got red and black a lot of things, right? It comes from backcrossing, introducing color genes into these various cattle breeds to the point where I can't tell them apart anymore. Okay? So you might say, well, so what? Who cares? I'm going to show you the so what in a bit. And the other thing that goes on is when I work with commercial producers and look for EPDs from breed associations for all sorts of traits. So I have a bull, and in this case we had 158 bulls that produced 2,000 progeny. I go, I want to know what the EPD, the breeding value is for those bulls. I go try to look them up, and I have this kind of process. Only about 60% have EPDs for birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, milk. Only about 30 or 40% have the carcass traits like hot carcass weight, back fat thickness, ribeye area, marbling. When I get into fertility traits, I'm almost blank, right? I can't, it's hard to find them. And one of the things that DNA does is once I take a sample, I can have all of those traits from the same sample. I don't have to be looking for them. And so that's the other opportunity. So there's a tremendous opportunity for genomics to supplement what breed associations are doing or what we're doing. And even to the point, this is the, 50-year trend for heifer fertility. This is not my work. This comes from the American Angus Association. It looks pretty flat to me, right? So it says over 50 years of doing something in terms of selection of heifer pregnancy EPD, we've really made no progress. And so then you wonder about the observations. Okay. So as a geneticist, when we get involved with various traits, whether new traits like today, methane emissions, right, or behavioral traits, we always look at this little cheat sheet. It tells us the importance of traits. And here today I've heard some really important, things that are just fit in line. Fertility is 10 times more important than carcass traits. This is for a cow-calf producer. And 5 times more important than growth traits. So don't chase the latter two, this 10 to 2 to 1 rule. The very first thing off is get fertility under control. And as you've seen in the talks today, there's many, 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 many factors, nutrition, size of cow, matching cows to the environment, etc., that can affect that, and including genetics. But for sure, when we're looking at things, get fertility under control. We want to be producing 92 calves per 100 females exposed to breeding. That's what we want to do as an industry. That would have a huge impact on profitability, sustainability, carbon footprint, all sorts of things. The other thing we look at we also look at the heritability of these traits. As we move towards growth and carcass, those traits are what we call moderately to moderately highly heritable, right? So we can make good genetic selection on them. When it comes to fertility, not so much. So when we look at these other traits like growth and carcass and feed efficiency, those are additive genetic traits. So explained simply, if I have one allele, in genetics term, if I have one form of the gene, it's better than none. right? And if I have two alleles, it's better than one, right? So that's what we call the additive genetic effect. Opposite kind of a thing, or a different kind of genetic effect, is what we call non-additive genetic effect. It's what happened during crossbreeding, is that what we do there is the intermediate form becomes the superior animal. The heterozygous becomes the superior animal. In other words, the two homozygous alleles are less active, or they give lower performance than the middle. So the bottom line here is, if we're studying fertility, there's no point looking at it. There's less effect looking at the additive genetic effect, and more importance should be placed on looking at heterosis, or what we might also say is genomic diversity. And you're going to hear that a lot. Genomic diversity really gives the individual the capacity to resist stress. And think about the things that are coming along for our livestock as we try to fight climate change. Well, fight is not the right word, but as we adapt to climate change, right? Having animals that have the genetic capacity to adapt to a changing environment. And that genomic diversity is really important. So you say, well, they're all red or black. How the heck can I tell the genomic diversity, right? And that's one of the reasons we get involved with genetic tests in large databases. I'm only going to show you this a bit. We have collected detailed phenotypes everywhere from growth to feed efficiency to carcass traits, etc., fertility traits across Western Canada. Mostly commercial crossbred producers. Most of this data does not come from research stations. It comes from people like yourselves, okay? And we keep it, and we also do genotyping. We'll genotype for, right now we're genotyping for 100,000 bits of genetic variability. So, you know, that we've got a pretty good understanding. We call those bits of genetic variabilities SNPs, because that's what geneticists like to do. They like to abbreviate everything, right? It's called a single nucleotide polymorphism, so you can know why we call it a SNP. So just remember, it's a SNP. It's a bit of genetic variability that could be associated with something important, right? Something important like marbling, as an example. So we got these large genetic databases, and some of them are purebred animals. Here we've got what we call our purebred reference database, with represented by 14 breeds, and there's the numbers, right? So they're all the common ones used. Even got some dairy in there. And why that's important is when we look at all those bits of genetic variability and we plot their frequency, the breeds separate, right? From a DNA point of view, we can identify in a three-dimensional graph like this, we can identify Herefords from Simmental, from Limousin, from Charolais, and you go, what do you need that for? I can already tell it, right? I don't need that. It's white. It's Charolais. Right? So we don't need that. But I'll show you. That's not why we do it. But here's the other reason. What we do it for is to look at crossbreeds, right? Remember that red animal that I was talking about that was everything but Angus, red Angus? We then use it to find out the proportion of the breeds in a crossbred. That's really important because that's how we determine how much hybrid vigor that individual animal has. Right, so in the middle there, I know I got a little pointer here. Which button is it? I had to ask because in the past I've pushed any button. Okay, and then I'm somewhere else. Okay, so here we go. Here, these are plotted on here. So here again, we see the Hereford and all the other breeds, Angus, Simmental, so forth. They're here. But this big blob right in the middle here, these are beef booster animals. Beef booster animals are highly crossbred. They've been done that way, and they're highly crossbred. And so then it allows us to find out exactly what they're made of. Primarily, this blob right here these are TXs, and TX is what they call their terminal cross line, and which is good, and it's a combination of Simmental, Limousin, and Charolais. So it's always nice to know that things work out like they should. Okay, so back to the red heifer. So why do we do this, right? We don't need to. We can tell a lot about color and breeds and whether they're registered or not. So this is one of the heifers that I worked with at the Lacombe Research Station. By the way, they also have a red and black herd because it reflects what the industry is doing, right? Going to red or black. I know we do see other colors driving down the road, but there's a lot of prominence to red and black. I look at that heifer and I say, I swear that's a red Angus. But it's not. We do a DNA test and we find out that, yeah, it's 50% of it's there, but there's also 40% is Simmental, red Simmental, I bet, obviously, and some other things. From that, we can determine a hybrid vigor score. And what's so important is the hybrid vigor score is proportional to fertility. Okay, so remember I said number one trait for cow-calf is fertility, and so this is pretty interesting. We did some, and so you go, why can't we do this with pedigree, right? I should just follow the pedigree. The beef industry doesn't do that very well. I'm going to show you why you can't do it with pedigree. There's this magical thing called genetic recombination, and it kind of re-scrambles everything. It's good from a genetic diversity point of view, but bad when you're doing pedigrees, because the pedigrees are good on average, herd average, but on individual, they're kind of a close approximation. I'll show you why. I've drawn some DNA here, and I'm going to just show you how it gets inherited. Okay, so here's some bits of, we call them haplotypes, but these are just bits of DNA that we're going to follow from the dam and sire. So the sire is an Angus, and the dam is a Hereford, and the offspring should be 50-50, right? Obviously. So when I follow the DNA and how it's inherited, you see how this drops down very nicely, and we get exactly what we should get, 50-50, okay? That's not where it craters. The next generation is, I take a Simmental sire, and I take my 50-50 female offspring, a dam now, and watch how things get. The inheritance is going to go exactly the same way. There we go. There's the sire, the DNA from the sire. Here comes the DNA from the dam. We think it's 50-50, but it's not. Or it should be 50-25-25, but it's not. It actually works out in this case to 50-15-35. It can even be less than that. It can be more variable than that. But that's what genetic recombination will do. And it's a good thing that it does that, but it kind of messes us up from a breeding perspective. But we now have the tools to be able to work with that. Paper was published on this. I don't want to belabor this, but really what it shows is we can determine from that breed composition, we can determine this thing called retained heterosis or retained heterozygosity, and it's linear related to some things. Not so much to weaning weight. Remember, weaning weights are highly heritable traits or moderately heritable traits. So every 10% change in the amount of hybrid vigor we get, it's only 10% or 3 pounds. Big deal, right? Who cares? Maybe we do a bit, but here is where it really has the impact on our fertility traits. Pregnancy rate, calving rate, lifetime productivity, days in the herd. 2 points means 2 more calves per 100 cows. Calves are what now? What, 2,500 or when I wean them? Jesus, I'm looking at that pretty careful. So 2 more calves per 10% change. Lifetime productivity is 79 more pounds over 5 parities, and 51 more days in the herd for every 10% change I have in hybrid vigor. Really important from a cow-calf point of view. Okay, so here's the economics of it. And essentially, we've got cumulative net income up the side there, right up the side here. What we're doing is we're following two herds. One's high hybrid vigor, the other one's low hybrid vigor. We're following them for 5 calvings or parities. The difference in income between high and low is like $80,000 for, what is this? There's 100 cows over 5 years, 5 parities. So that's a tremendous amount of income that is made. It primarily comes about because of increased fertility, reduced open rate. So that's a key. So, when I look at replacement heifers, before I even look at the numbers, I want to know, is that heifer, how crossbred that heifer is? How much hybrid vigor does that heifer have? That's the very first thing I want to know. And we can't tell usually. Okay, the other thing too is if we follow these animals that have high hybrid vigor, we also find that they have lower all-cause morbidity and mortality. This is something that we did at the Kinsella Ranch, and what we did is we followed almost 700 high hybrid vigor calves. All-cause morbidity and mortality was, there was 48 animals treated or died for a all-cause morbidity and mortality of 6.5%, whereas the low vigor calves had much higher rates, right? So it has to do with having more genomic diversity, also has to do with overall health and fitness, okay? Animals that are more genetically diverse can handle stressors, whether they're stressors in their environment to do with weaning or being put in the feedlot or whatever it is, they're just able to handle stressors much better. And when we plot all that out in terms of a life cycle assessment for carbon footprint, obviously because one herd is producing way more calves than the other, it translates very nicely to when we do a life cycle assessment and account for enteric methane, manure N2O, manure methane, and cropping N2O and energy CO2. Essentially, this is the carbon footprint, and the difference between a high hybrid vigor herd and a low is around 3/4 of a ton of CO2 equivalents, or 3/4 of a carbon credit in the Alberta system, where you can actually buy and sell carbon credits. And it'll work out to around $32 per animal slaughtered, when we're working at a ton of carbon being worth $50. Does any of you know what a carbon credit is worth now? I think it's creeping up to 85 if the federal government gets its way. Oop, shouldn't have said that. Okay, so there is money to be made buying and selling carbon credits. And in Alberta, what happens is a project is registered on the Alberta Environment website. Carbon credits are accumulated under specific recipes, or they call them protocols. It's registered, and then large final emitters look at that project and they can buy those credits. And what I mean by large final emitters are people like TransAlta, EPCOR, Oil Sands. And already millions of dollars have traded hands from the large final emitters to producers. Okay, so lot of stuff there, but really the bottom line is, if you have a chance and you're doing all those good things with replacement heifers, right? You're making sure they're from easy calving, early calving, they reach their 60% of mature cow weight at breeding. But if you can find out how crossbred those animals are, how much hybrid vigor, even from a pedigree. Like, if you don't want to spend any money, at least ask about the pedigree. I think the answer is, from the beef industry, will be, we don't know. Because the beef industry is notorious for not following pedigree, minimal records, all that kind of stuff. So what do we do with it? We've also made what we call a replacement heifer profit index. And this is where we balance a whole bunch of traits. Traits that are heritable with genomic diversity. So the retained heterozygosity is that non-additive part I talked about earlier about. So that's the hybrid vigor. And we balance it with all these other traits like birth weight and weaning weight. Residual feed intake, my favorite topic, because I've worked on it for over 20 years. But that's feed efficiency. Those are animals that just eat less for the same amount of production. A behavior trait that's called feeding duration, pre-breeding weight, pre-breeding back fat thickness, and age at first calving. And those values right there are the weightings. That's kind of like the approximate weightings we place on things. The reason residual feed intake is negative is better, right? I'm not going to get into a whole thing about residual feed intake because I'll miss my plane. But just remember, negative is what we're looking for in that side. So that's it. So then we've got this index, but we got to validate it. And how do we validate it? We come to you and we test your heifers and we say, keep this one and get rid of that one, and then we follow them through. We keep both, but they're going to be divided up into different groups. And the very first thing we do, in this case, we had almost 2,000 heifers that we were following. And we rank them. See the replacement heifer profit index score ranking, 1 to right down to 1899. Okay, that one's last, by the way. So we rank them all. And then we divide them in half when we say, these are the ones that are good and these are the ones we're not. And so then we follow those and we see how they did. So there is the below average heifers that we followed through just until their first pregnancy and their first calf. There was like 360 about, 275 calved, and there were 84 that were open. For an open rate of 23%, that's pretty high. That's a pretty high open rate. And then our other group, which was above average, so we got 550 and we got 75 open there. And the open rate there is kind of more like we would like to see. It'd be nice to be lower than that, but 14% is not terrible. It's not a crisis, that's for sure. And the p-value is very high. If you follow all that through and put some numbers on it, it comes out to, between those two herds, around 19,000 in net income per 100 replacement heifers, or a 6 to 1 return on investment. So those are important numbers to consider in a cow-calf operation. Okay, so then we're going to go a little bit further. How much time do I have? Oh, I'm good. I'm moving along okay. So this is a replacement heifer. This is a feeder profit index. So what this is I want a bull that I'm going to use as a terminal sire, and I want it to produce feeder cattle that are more profitable. They're more feed efficient, they grow faster, they get out of the feedlot sooner, and they have good marbling, carcass weight, back fat thickness, the whole schmear. That's what I want. And so then we made this index. You notice it has no hybrid vigor in it. And the reason is hybrid vigor is not so much important in this particular trait, mainly because these are all heritable traits, right? So I don't need to worry so much about. But hybrid vigor does play a part in some of these, but minor, like 2-3%. So there's the weightings. Whoops, back. Oh, never mind. So you saw the weighting. No, you didn't see the weightings because I moved it on. But the weightings are heavy. Oh, good, thanks. Yeah, so feed efficiency is number one by a long ways. And that makes a lot of sense for cattle in a feed yard, right? That's your major cost. Post-weaning gain, carcass weight, back fat, lean meat yield, marbling. I'll bet you there's a lot of people in this room thought that marbling should be really important, right? Because isn't that where you get most of your money? Surprise, surprise, it's not. When you actually work it out, the major factor affecting carcass net income is carcass weight. And all you do with the other things is take discounts. So if I have a AAA carcass, I might get $6 per hundredweight more or $9 per hundredweight more. But if I happen to overfatten or overweight, I get discounted like crazy. And so so this is based on economics, an economic model. And so it surprised me too, because it seems like everybody that's growing a steer and putting to slaughter, they're always interested, well, what's the grid? What's the grid? What do we get for AAA? Well, maybe that's not so important. Just have enough marbling so it's juicy. Okay. Again, we follow the same thing, right? We create an index and then we go validate it on feedlot cattle in this case. And that's just some of the numbers, right? So there was 137 sires, produced 1,900 crossbred feeder cattle. Everything went through Cargill High River, great. We got all the carcass data back, right? Really detailed, including camera data. Tremendous, most of you can't do that. But the alliances that have been made in Alberta that own these steers, that is part of the contract for putting cattle into Cargill. Okay, so here's just one example. This is what we call a sire proof in the genetics term. What we do is we have sire molecular breeding values. So there should be 137 dots there with different breeding values for the sire, for marbling score, and then the mean progeny performance. So that sire produced 15 progeny, and its mean performance was one of those dots. You can see it's a very nice, pretty nice line. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like theoretical, right? In other words, when we did the genomic evaluation or the genomic prediction said the theoretical accuracy would be 0.58. The actual realized accuracy when we did this was 0.6. So really good indication that when you receive a breeding value and it has an accuracy of 0.2, you can be pretty sure that it's near 0.2, okay? If it's 6.6 or 0.7, then that's going to be really good. And by the way, there are breed associations with crossbred cattle too that have accuracies above 70%. So the beef industry and the purebred associations are coming along really well in terms of improving the accuracy of their breeding values. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. And just go to, this is sort of like the bottom line of this index. So what it says is if I have a sire that has a feeder profit index of minus 25, and I have another sire that has a feeder profit index of plus 25, they produce a bunch of progeny, then the difference between those two sets of progeny is going to be around $77. So that's net return. So essentially each unit in the feeder profit index equals $1.54 in terms of how it will impact the net return from your feeder cattle. So that's a pretty good indication that this is a reliable, useful thing to do. We're also doing this. This is for beef-on-beef systems, but we're also going to be creating a similar kind of index for beef-on-dairy, right? And you kind of blink your eyes a few times about that. But the dairy industry has really adopted genomics very, very well. They're making tremendous progress on their milk profit index to the point where they only need about 40% of their herd to replace replacements. And of course, they pick the best cows to replace the best replacements. Well, the other 60% or 50% is for revenue generation. Well, having a dairy calf generating revenue in the beef industry, not very good. Dairy calves don't do so well, right? Their muscle shape and their muscle combination isn't very good. And they don't grow well. Feed efficiency isn't the greatest. So essentially what's happened is a lot of very innovative individuals have come in and said, why don't we take that bottom 50% and breed them to beef bulls and produce beef on dairy cattle? And that seems to be working very well. The unfortunate part is we don't have any selection indexes for that yet because it's a different production system. So that's what we're going to be involved in. So we're involved with some of the biggest cattle feeders and cattle buyers to develop that index. Anyway, okay, I want to get it to DNA pooling. Okay, so cost of genotyping is prohibitive for beef cattle producers to use the technology. There's a lot of things we can do. We can say, well, just do bulls. You only have 5 bulls this year, just do them all. Right? Not the whole herd, just the 5 bulls, because that's your most important part. Or we can just say, do the heifers. But in any case, it's going to cost you $52 per genotype for 100K SNP chip or 100,000 SNPs. So we kind of got the bright idea, instead of doing that, why don't we pool the DNA sample, right? Because essentially what we can do is reduce costs by a lot. So in this particular example, to genotype them all 120 individuals at $52 plus processing and administrative fees, everything has that these days, it's going to cost over $6,000. Well, boy, we better get some return. If I'm going to spend $6,000 on something, I better see some good return. So instead what we're doing is we investigated how pooling would affect that to the point where we got down to, on these 120 head, we said, well, maybe it's best to break them down to 6 pools. And that would only cost us $580. Puts it in a whole different light, doesn't it? I don't have to spend $6,000. I only have to spend $600. Well, okay, but there's still a proposition there. What's the benefit? Because when I'm DNA pooling, I lose something, right? I lose all of that individual animal stuff. But there's some things you can still do with this, and I'll show it to you. You can still determine genomic breed composition. So of a pool of 20 heifers, you can still determine what the average breed composition of that group of heifers is. So it would tell you, okay, am I using one breed too much? Is that group of red heifers starting to be all red Simmental? If it is, then I can make the decision very quickly to bring in a red Angus or a red Gelbvieh or something, right? So I can do that very quickly. The other thing that it will do is, so here's the relationship between the gold standard hybrid vigor score, right? That means everything individual. We're doing it individually. Costs a lot of money. Or I'm going to do it based on pooling. I can 20 animals per pool, 50 animals per pool, whatever. And so I've got lots of observation here. So the very first thing you do notice here is the hybrid vigor score is very high. Hybrid vigor score varies from 0, which is purebred, to near 1. You notice everybody here is high, right? So this is a highly crossbred herd, and to tell you who these are beef booster cattle, okay, that are highly crossbred. They have been that way long. The other thing that you can do with this is you can find groups of cattle that are slipping. Okay? Now these groups of cattle aren't slipping much, right? Just a little bit. They're only 0.8 or 0.2 or whatever. But what if you had a group of animals that went down to 0.3? That would be a really good indication that you need to bring in another source, another bull to deal with it. So there is still some things you can do with DNA pooling at 1/10 of the cost, just to break your way into the whole area of what genomics can bring to a cow-calf operation. Oops. Okay, so get your phones out and scan those QR codes because you could be making some money here. So we have a project that will incentivize the cost of genotyping quite a bit. So I said each genotype is going to cost $52. Under this project, only $20. The project pays for the other $32. The first QR code up there is some of the material I presented, only 2 pages, okay? Thank God. Only 2 pages. So it'll be a repeat of some of the slides you saw. The second QR code down there is how you submit your samples and what the conditions are. So if any of you are interested in genotyping your animals and getting it at a really reasonable cost, and even if it is just 10 replacement heifers, the exercise will be rewarding. You will learn a lot, but you'll also find out where the value of these tools are, right? So, you know, we don't make any money off this. We actually lose $32 a head. and we don't do the genotyping either. We send them off to Neogen Canada. And Neogen Canada or Neogen US does them. But the other thing too is if you sign up, we want the records on those cattle. And the reason is so that we can determine how well the test is doing, and you can determine how well the test is doing. You know, there's always this saying that when you get a new piece of technology, I want to know myself whether it works. We're totally into that, and we want to know too, because if it doesn't work, you know, we can do things to make it better. Okay, so I'm leaving that there for a while because I know sometimes you put QR codes up there and they're gone before you can even get your phone out. Okay, so I'm almost done here. And just conclusion. So when it comes down to crossbreeding and commercial cow-calf producers, you know, maintaining that hybrid vigor, or this is scientific, right? Retained heterozygosity, or the amount of genomic diversity, really important. If you have a chance and you're picking replacement heifers, make sure that you know, if you can do the replacement heifer profit index score, that's a really good way to sort your replacement heifers. We know that feeder profit index works really well, and we know that all of these things have an impact on profit, health resilience, and reducing carbon footprint. So that's where I want to end. And thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Wonderful information in that presentation. Thank you, John. Let's have time for some questions. And full transparency, we have to keep it tight. He has a flight to catch, but he does love answering questions. So please fire away.
Any question is good. Any question is good.
Do you need microphone? There's one here.
I'll give you them with a mic back, I swear. Maybe this is a dumb question, I don't know. In the mineral presentation before, Mary Jane was talking about the increasing open rates that they've had at their place, and it sounds like in the sector there's been quite a few. So how do you tell, you know, Mary Jane had this nice list of things they're working through to check what it would be, and this seems like an additional thing to that list. How much of an effect does the hybrid score have on that? Is that a good question?
That's a good question. Yeah, because there's a lot of factors that go into fertility of replacement heifers, right? I mean, think about it. Development, we got to have from an early calf, easy calver, born early in the calving season. It's got to reach 60% of its mature cow weight. It's got to be properly nourished. All the things that you talked about, a good mineral program, a good vaccination program. Where I'm coming from and the cattle I work with already follow that. We already meet or exceed nutrient requirements. We supplement with trace minerals the right mixes, because we are very familiar with all the work on how all the variability there is in mineral consumption. So then you think, well, if I follow all those things, I got it made. I'm going to end up with 92% calf crop, but you don't. Something else is going on. And that something else, I'm saying, is partially genetics. It is partially other things that we don't understand yet, okay? So all of these things have to be considered. So, if I was you and I was picking replacement heifers, I'd go, how have I done? Have I done all these top 10 things that producers all are doing, including vaccination and making sure that they meet or exceed NRC requirements? Is where I would start. And then I'd come in and say, how much hybrid vigor in that heifer? Before anything else. I don't care what her structure is, what her conformation is, whatever. That's the next thing I'd be looking at. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, I see a hand up. Carla?
So this is interesting because 25 years ago, there was a very much push on heterosexual, that crossing. And then it kind of just petered out. And in the industry, we didn't hear a lot about it for the last 20 years. I'm not sure why it kind of dissipated. But to me, this brings that system back up into the forefront. Maybe it was because cattle producers decided they all wanted to keep their own replacement heifers. And I mean, like, maybe the herd size weren't big enough. I don't know what the issue was, but they all went to terminal bulls and kept their heifers. And it was like, okay, now we have 1,800-pound cows that are not maternal anymore, and we're building for the hook space.
Yeah. So really good. So 25, 30 years ago, even further than that, when we had some of the biggest crossbreeding studies in North America, right? At Clay Center, Nebraska, at Dr. Roy Berg, who is actually my supervisor, who is the father of crossbreeding in Canada. They did huge crossbreeding studies and proved the merit of crossbreeding and how well it was related to fertility and fitness and all that stuff. They were doing it on pedigree. And I already told you, I'd have to be Dr. Berg. I'd say, you're doing that wrong. But he was doing the best he could at the time, right? Really proved the point of crossbreeding. What has happened in that 25 years has carcass traits and growth have taken over as the driving force behind why we produce calves. Packers said, we want uniform calves, all the same color, because they're going to marble and they're going to finish and they're going to be consistent and all this stuff. And pretty soon we start seeing the divergence to red and black, okay? Because they were receiving premiums in the marketplace, right? Certified Angus, right? That's a really big success story. So that's part of the reason that drove that. We all of a sudden said, we want a really uniform looking red herd or a black herd, or both. And that's going to make sure that we get the highest calf price. And for a while it did. But in doing that, because cow-calf producers had no idea about pedigree, they're kind of doing a cobbity breeding system. I don't know whether any of you know what a cobbity system is, but it means cull old bull battery every 3 years. Okay? And so they lost track of what the heck was going on. And pretty soon, they weren't sure what was in that red one and the black one. So that's part of the reason. We're coming around again because producers are starting to realize that they're not controlling some traits, i.e. mature cow weight and your 1,800-pound cow that's not matched to the grazing resource or the environment, right? And the very first thing is a cow that does that, she comes up open. That's the very first thing that she'll do, right? Because she's not matched. So those are some of the things that have gone on in the history. And you have to be an old guy like me to have had that history, right? To see, it's pretty clear to me what went on. And it's just went we started chasing carcass traits, which is the wrong thing for cow-calf producers to do.
I think we have time for maybe one more quick question, if there is one. Going once. Oh, there we go.
There's one.
Okay, so my question is, we're going to be coming up with herd expansion in the next few years. What are the things that producers should keep top of mind as they start to consider how genetics and genomic tools might help them? You talked about heifer pregnancy and stuff like that, but even like some of the environmental stuff and things like that, it strikes me we have an opportunity to maybe make some real change if we really think about it before it starts.
Right. So I don't know whether any of you, all of you heard the question. It was about herd expansion. You know that we've been in this long, across North America of decreasing our cow herds. In the US, I think it's like 80%. Is it? Lowest in 70 years. And Canada is pretty darn close, but it's not that much. So the question was about, okay, we're going to start herd expansion. What are some of the key things that we should think about, right, in terms of the cattle that we buy? I always go back to one of the very first, I have the 10 to 2 to 1 rule, but you guys already know that. But the other thing that's really important is to match the cow biological type, to its grazing resource and its environment, right? So making sure whatever combination of breeds or crossbreeds you use matches the environment. That is sort of like the fundamental step of becoming more profitable, right? What you're doing is you're saying, at least I got a cow type here that's not 1,800 pounds, but it's maybe 1,350. It matches my resources. I'm not going crazy looking for feed, and I don't end up with second calvers that are open all the time, right? So that would be one of the things. It also fits perfectly into the sustainability question, right? The other thing is, beef producers, keep records, please. Right? The dairy industry is the biggest record-keeping thing in the world. They have made so much progress in the last 30 years, 25 years. It's just amazing. And same with the other industries. And then adopt genetic selection and genomic tools. You knew I was going to say that, right? But that's me. So right off the top of my head, I would go there. I wouldn't, maybe this is political, but I wouldn't chase the boat of net zero. Okay, I wouldn't do that. And the reason is, I'm not sure what you're going to get out of it. I think you should do the best you can do for improving efficiency, improving your profitability, and in doing that, you will bring down the carbon footprint. But to chase net zero, I think, is a branding issue. And I don't think you'll get paid for it, right? So that's me. I think more appropriately than that is think about ways our cow herd can adapt to a changing climate, right? How do we change our forages? How do we change our breeding animals? How do we change that? So we end up with a resilient animal that can resist droughts and high temperatures and all that kind of thing. So that's it without me rambling on more.
Thank you. Okay, one more round of applause for Dr. John Bissara. Thank you so much for your time and expertise in coming to our conference. We really appreciate it.